When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. A very good afternoon to you, and welcome to our first episode of the New Normal, organized by the Newsfirst team, along with Mr. Chandra Jayaratnam, who's acting of Commerce. And a big thank you also goes out to Nero Cook, Group Director of the Capital Maharaj Organization, for organizing this webinar to talk about the economic impact of COVID-19 on Sri Lanka and the region as a whole. Now, for the first time in recent human history, coronavirus has shattered the myth that the economy must come first, while public health concerns undoubtedly should take precedence over all the considerations when dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. It would be unwise to ignore the economic costs of the current situation. Hence, we've invited 5 guests to this panel today. Joining me this afternoon is Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja, Senior Banker, Managing Director, CEO of Cargill's Bank. Also joining us this afternoon for the chat is Dr. Andre Kanayaka, economist, former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Dana Fernando joins us, the CEO of the Advocata Institute. And also joining us tonight on this show is Shakta Matunga, a finance professional, as well as Deshal Dimel, economist of Verite Research. We are conducting this Zoom-in, using the Zoom-in application to connect to our viewers, respecting the advice given by the health authorities on social distancing. So please give us some room to open the floor for questions from our viewers as well. So that would happen momentarily. After the end of the first round, you can pose your questions on the Q&A panel of the Zoom-in application, and we can take it from there onwards. So to start off with, we'll join Dr. Andre Kanayaka, who will be having 4 minutes to talk about the economic impact. Your first question is Dr. Kanayaka, who is the economist as well as a former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Public health, Dr. Kanayaka, is a major concern, and economic stakes of the current situation are unprecedented. How important is it for the government to be open to a unique policy solution to address a unique crisis, something of COVID-19?
As you said, Shamir, this is an unprecedented situation. We are having this discussion at a time where there are many unknowns. We don't know how long COVID-19 impact will be felt. We don't know how long the curfew and different types of lockout measures will be continued. But if we go take the Chinese example, we can safely assume that even a minimum degree of return to normalcy cannot be expected before the passage of 6 months. And even then, it will be a gradual return to normalcy over a period of 12 months to perhaps 24 months. Now, during this period, there will be many changes in the global arena, many changes in the domestic arena. In the global arena, we are going to see a very sharp and prolonged reduction in global travel, including tourism. We're going to see substantial disruptions in the markets, which will impact us because we are heavily trade-dependent economy. We export about 10 billion worth of our goods, and then we import about $20 billion worth of our goods we need. So on one hand, we'll see the global markets disrupted, so the demand will reduce for our goods. On the other hand, the global supply chains, particularly the source countries such as China and India, are impacted, and we don't know how much the supply chains will be disrupted. The biggest domestic things are, A, because of the resulting disruption, the livelihoods of the majority of Sri Lankans is affected severely, and that has an impact on the marketplace. The demand will be severely reduced across the spectrum, and the focus will be on the essentials. The ability of the government to intervene will be again severely limited, not only because of the impact of COVID-19, but also because we do not have any fiscal space for spending money in a significant manner in order to create a stimulus. Also because we are faced with a massive debt crisis. So in view of those, we in the private sector, in the business community, have to recognize that the first priority of the government will be maintaining a degree of some degree of normalcy in terms of the basic sustenance of people, food and medicine. And given the fiscal constraint, it's unlikely that the government will be able to do anything more than looking after the basic sustenance of the masses in terms of expenditure. However, the government could ensure that the constraints which are imposed inevitably due to COVID-19 in terms of conducting day-to-day business can be minimized. Where controls are necessary, they can be streamlined so that there are no undue delays in carrying on with the essential transactions. Now, we see what's going on with the collection and distribution of vegetables, for example. We need to, so the government needs to think very carefully that how can delays, wastage, resulting loss in revenue for people, and also discontent can be minimized. So to repeat myself, from the government's point of view, I think there's only two things which can be done. One is to ensure that the bare minimum food requirements of all the people of the land are looked after. Secondly, the health needs of the populace, not merely of due to corona or COVID-19, but other ailments are addressed. On the side of the business, my feeling is what the government should do is to reduce constraints and play the role of a facilitator to see that the markets are operating, or at least come back to operation as fast as possible. So, Samit, that's about the overview I can give you at this stage.
Thank you very much, Dr. Untitled. We now move our attention to Mr. Rajendran Tyagaraja, Senior Banker and Managing Director, CEO of Cargill's Bank. Mr. Tyagaraja, since the banking sector is the backbone of any economy, any significant economic downturn is going to directly affect the banks at large. Now, there are difficulty operating in these conditions as far as COVID-19 is concerned. How do you view the role of the banking sector during this COVID-19 pandemic?
So before I get to the lending and the balance sheet side, Shamil, what's very important is banking is not only about lending, it's also about keeping the wheels of trade and payments going. And I think what you would have noticed is from the day curfew has started and perhaps for the past 3 weeks, the payment and settlements infrastructure of the country has continued unabated with little or no interruption. And that has happened because of the very close coordination between all the bank CEOs and the central bank with the director of payment and settlements to make sure, despite whether a bank's physical counters are closed or not, payments and receipts have not slowed down. The second point which has come out of this whole exercise is you have seen a fairly significant shift in people who had the tools before for online and mobile banking actually shifting to that medium. In fact, this is not only for people like you and me, but even the smaller micro payments. In fact, I just got some numbers. In the last 14 days, the Lanka Clear, which facilitates micro payments, has seen literally a 210% growth in micro payments online in the last 14 days. So that's a nice, I think, shift which will perhaps set the tone for way forward once this thing settles down. The next thing to bear in mind is, okay, I think the government together with the banks have worked together, and there was an announcement of a 50 billion rupee refinancing package announced to support the micro and the SME sector, which I think was a good thing which was done, and I think there's a lot of publicity given to that. But what the public should realize is this this 50 billion, when compared to the literally 10 trillion of loan stock in the banking system, accounts for just 0.5%. So again, an appeal to all responsible businesses: give the opportunity first for the small and medium guys to benefit from this. If the big boys try to squeeze in, then there'll be hardly anything left for the small guys. So that's an important message. And the third point I'd like to make is, while we speak about a 50 billion refinance package, this industry as a whole has a responsibility already to shoulder an approximately 10,000 billion of loans currently in their balance sheets. So they have a fundamental responsibility to preserve the stability of the system, because for every 1 rupee of shareholder capital, literally 9 rupees is funded through public deposits. So as public deposit taking institution, we have a fundamental responsibility to also give the confidence to the depositing public and the general public that their money is safe and managed in a responsible manner despite these challenges, in also distributing this refinance scheme, but also having empathy in working out with borrowers. I think it's a fine balancing act which the banks will have to do, and I'm sure the combined expertise of the system, together with a very closely engaged central bank, will see us through these trying difficult times.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rajan Thyagaraja, Senior Banker, Managing Director, CEO of Cargill's Bank. We, of course, will speak more to Mr. Thyagaraja with regard to the 50 billion rupee grant provided by the government and speak a little bit of bolts and nuts as to how this is going to be divided into various sectors. We now move our attention to Mr. Shakta Amartunga, a finance professional. Mr. Amartunga, we've known that the government has always said that it is important to have the private sector as the engine of growth in an economy. And this has been clearly articulated by the government of Sri Lanka as well. How important do you think the role of the private sector in a crisis of this sort? And do you think the government is serious with regard to the role of the private sector in a pandemic of this nature, which is unprecedented? Your time starts now.
Yeah, it's a tough question, but I think it's I first believe the first answer to the last question is I'm sure the government is serious, because without the private sector, the economic impact will be very big, and private sector employs quite a lot of people across the country, and also it churns a lot of money through the banking sector with exports, and also keeps the local economy going. So to me, I think the 2 or 3 economists here could answer that question probably much smarter. But I think the important thing here is the government, I'm sure, is very serious about the private sector, but the private sector itself has a role to play. And I think not only the large companies in Sri Lanka, there are small and medium scale companies in Sri Lanka that requires help. It's not only the financial help that is required for these companies. Some of these companies also need the thought leadership, the ability to change in this environment and survive in this environment, because in the end there are stakeholders who are around these small companies. It's not just one company. There are suppliers, there are customers, there are employees, there are people who surround these companies. Even people who provide lunch for some of these companies are also part of the economy. So it's important that some of these private sector companies are also looked after. And one thing I would also say is that it's difficult for government to go and subsidize, as Dr. Anurekanaika highlighted earlier. There are challenges that the government has in terms of the fiscal deficit. So the private sector itself plays a key role in terms of the GDP of the economy. And to me, there is a big role that the private sector will play, and we need to help the private sector to manage the business smartly. Because if the private sector businesses do not continue in this economy, we will have impacts in terms of employment, suppliers, the supply chain issues, all sorts of issues that can create more chaos in the economy. So keeping the private sector going, to me, is a key thing, and I'm sure the government is definitely keen to help the private sector. In that, if I'm to consider a solution, I'm not sure whether you want me to answer that now, but I think it's more, we should, just like what the government has currently done in terms of managing the pandemic in the country, I believe there should be a seriousness given into the think tank of the government to at least create a separate unit that engages the private sector, whether the chambers or industry groups, and try and listen to the issues that the private sector will have in the current environment. It's not only giving the 50 billion package that helps. I think there are other things that the private sector needs to think through and try and overcome in this environment. So to me, if the government is serious, they should listen to the private sector, and they should also set up a very strong, resourceful unit that will help the private sector through this crisis, and make sure that the organizations, majority of the private sector organizations, do survive across this catastrophe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shakta Amaratunga, finance professional. We'll talk to Mr. Amaratunga as the show goes on, how important it is to be fit and agile as far as companies are concerned in the long run and the short term as far as COVID-19 is concerned. We now move our attention to Deshal Demel, economist from Verite Research. Very good evening to you, Deshal. Now, despite the actions taken by the regulators, given the current market conditions, now we expect the Sri Lankan rupee to further depreciate against the US dollar in the coming few months. Now, how important is it for government to take adequate lines of foreign funding to manage the short-term pressure on the currency, because we know that we just hit the above 200 rupee mark against the US dollar just a couple of days ago, and then we saw the action taken by the regulators to cushion the rupee as well against the US dollar. So how important is it for the government to take adequate lines of foreign funding to manage short-term pressure on the currency for the benefit of the importers as well as the exporters?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show today. Yeah, I mean, everybody has been concerned about the recent impacts that we've been seeing on the currency. And if you take a couple of steps back and look at the fundamentals, if you look at our balance of payments, at present, the current account is facing a number of competing impacts. So we have, from the positive side, you're seeing global oil prices have come down by about 50%. At the same time, we're likely to see imports being reduced, both by intervention measures, but also given the lower demand in the economy in general. But at the same time, we have significant negative disruptions on our inflows as well. So from sectors like tourism to exports, and also likely remittances, all of our key sources of inflows will also be adversely affected. So when you look at some analysis of these competing impacts, what you can see on the current account is that by and large, if you look at for a full year, you're likely to see the current account either in balance or slightly positive or slightly negative. So that's what you can see is that from a fundamental perspective, the current account is not a major driver of the rupee depreciation right now. What is at the capital account has a more significant impact, primarily because we have significant external liabilities that are maturing this year. We have about $6 billion worth of external debt liabilities that are maturing for the 12-month period, of which about $4.5 billion is sovereign liabilities. But we have reserves as of end March of $7.5 billion. So it's clear that if you look at our liabilities versus our reserves, we have very limited space on the capital account of the balance of payments as well. So this obviously must be concerning the market also. Another frequent driver of rupee depreciation in Sri Lanka is sales of foreign holdings of rupee securities. Now already we've seen a fair amount of sales of foreign holdings of government securities. We're down to about 36 billion rupees as of the most recent data. So there's not a lot to go. So that also can't be a major driver. So it's really, I think, sentiment right now that is causing the significant pressure on the rupee. We've seen the central bank aggressively easing monetary policy, as it has to do in order to accommodate and to support real economic activity on the home front, and to ensure continued liquidity into the real markets. But there's also been central bank purchases of government securities directly, which has also added liquidity to the market. So these factors, whilst they're supportive of keeping the wheels of the economy turning and ensuring liquidity, it does create some negative sentiment on the currency front. And I think that is what's really driving the pressure on the rupee in the last couple of weeks. So in order to address that, as you quite rightly said, it's important that the government takes some measures to restore this credibility and restore confidence. And I think in that sense, if we can demonstrate some kind of secured lines from institutions like the IMF or the ADB or the key development organizations, that will restore some confidence in the markets that we do have a backstop and we do have some bottom in terms of the pressure on the currency. So I would think it's critical that the government does look at these kind of external lines as urgently as possible. Institutions like the IMF have already shown that they are very keen to expand their liquidity to developing countries. They've announced already a number of countries that have benefited from this. And I think it's important that Sri Lanka does seriously engage in something like that to signal credibility and to signal a degree of confidence to markets as well.
Thank you very much, Deshal Dimel, economist, Veritiv Research. We, of course, will speak to Deshal more about the exchange rates and also the balance of payments with regard to implications for economic activity. I now move my attention to Dharanath Fernando, Chief Operating Officer of the Advocata Institute. Dharanath, I hate to start with you on a pessimistic note, but there is no way that I'm going to start with optimism because we are facing a crisis at present. Now, in 2008, 2010, between this period, the Great Recession, as we call it, we lost approximately 90,000 jobs in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lankans were in dire straits between this period. Now, how do you think the private sector is going to handle in the short term as well as the midterm in terms of finding solutions, finding job opportunities to the people who may lose jobs as a result of COVID-19? What must the government do to equip the country's economy to take on this burden in the short term as well as the medium term? Your time starts now.
Shamir, first of all, we need to really look at the landscape right now. So first of all, we entered this crisis already with a bad start. In terms of, if I were to mention it in cricket terms, our batsman entered the park where we have about 400 score to be chased, and we already lost about 5-6 wickets because our economic growth rate was about 2.3% according to the recent census and statistics. So we had a bad start to enter the crisis. But now what has happened has happened. So what can we do is the important question. So in terms of private sector landscape, it is very clear there will be pay cuts in the main conglomerates. Already the big companies have announced starting from 25% to 50% pay cuts. So what would happen is when you have a pay cut, obviously your labor force will be to an extent demotivated because they have already commitments, loan commitments, so they may get demotivated in the first place. And at the same time, there will be also some of the jobs will lose and go out of the market. So what would happen is most of these people will try to start part-time jobs. For an instance, if I am a full-time worker, I may, if I have a recipe, a bakery recipe, I may start that. So actually, those who are working in the private sector may consider like the online options, the part-time job options, part-time payment options. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is those who lose the jobs, they will also try to start something and again join back to the economy. So what government could do is, while we are focusing on the little things, since we had a bad start, why we had a bad start, that picture, that fabric hasn't changed. Giving you an example, for an instance, if you were to start now, if I'm working full time, so I'm looking for a part-time job opportunity. So I'm starting a bakery, for an instance, a bakery product online. So I'm going to register the business. But if I'm going to register the business as a sole proprietor, already the bureaucracy and the process that I have to go through is tedious. So what government could do is, while they are working on the small little things, there is a big picture and they could do quick reforms. For instance, the business registration process for a private or like a sole proprietorship can be bring down, the regulation can be bring down very easily. Just an idea. So as an example, definitely there will be demotivation and people will shift from for more part-time jobs, and those who will lose jobs will start something. And there has to be an easy regulatory scheme or a regulatory context for those people to not to demotivate them further, but to encourage them and join the economy. That's one thing that we could do. In terms of private sector, I think they may also have to think because in the pay cuts, with the demotivation, there will be further productivity loss for the private companies. And that is something that they have to manage, because no one would really want to go through a pay cut, even how bad is the situation. So in terms of people's perspective, I think we all have to be psychologically prepared to work hard. When I say work hard, we might have to look for more options to balance our expenditure. And individually, we have to do expenditure cuts in our own balancing in our own expenditures. And private sector is also has to consider it seriously. My final point is also there is a golden opportunity for the government at this point. The opportunity is as I told you in cricket terms, we are chasing a big score. So you can't win this game just scoring singles. You have to hit couple of boundaries, couple of sixes. So at the same time, which has been lagging, the big reforms has to be taken place now. because people's point of view, they already know that this is a hard time, and they are already somewhat they are accepting to fasten their seatbelt. So there will be more openness from the people end to go for a big reform. Just to give you an example, in terms of export, we all know how tedious is the process at the Sri Lanka customs. So this is a good time to take some hard calls and hard reforms, but not to give any more wickets, like imposing price controls, which I'll explain later, but to keep the wickets. And of course, there are a couple of full tossers we can easily hit out of the park. And I think we should take that and do those also big reforms, and which has been lagging for the last couple of years, even maybe decades. So I think this is the time we have to take that opportunity and go for a couple of big reforms as well.
So thank you very much, Dhananath Fernando, for your thoughts in the first round. Now, the government did make a few mistakes based on what Dhananath said on one of the previous shows with me. He said that price controls as well as printing money was a wrong move as far as the government is concerned to move about as far as post-COVID-19 is concerned. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that with Dhananath, along with the challenges faced by the exporters in a dire situation of this sort. So I open the floor for questions from our viewers who are joining with the webinar program. You could go to the Q&A application, which is on the right hand corner, the top layer. You could see Q&A. You can pose your questions to our panelists as well. I want to move my attention to quickly to Mr. Rajan Tyagaraja, Senior Banker, Managing Director, CEO of Cargill's Bank. Now, Mr. Tyagaraja, there is never a free meal or a free lunch in business. So I want to talk about this 50 billion rupees grant provided by the government, in particularly to which sectors is the government going to give this 50 billion rupees? And most of the sectors would need a small piece of this pie to boost their industries in question, be it a stimulus package for them. So how do you think this is going to be divided? Whether it's going to go to the small and medium scale enterprises or the large companies? Who's going to take the big part of this pie in the future?
Okay. So I think the intent, the first thing is this is not a grant. This is a refinancing package, which means that it is at a lower interest rate for incremental working capital for deserving primarily small and medium businesses. So it's really in the MSME, and I think while they speak about certain sectors like exports, tourism, and a few other sectors, as bankers, I think what we would look at is primarily we will look at our existing customer base, and if anyone comes to us with a business proposal by saying that during this period we do have a working capital issue which we cannot manage with internally generated funds or the existing borrowing requirements, and we need something, I believe this scheme allows you up to 2 months of additional working capital to be given at that concessional 4% refinance rate, which can be repaid, I believe, over 24 months for performing companies with a 6 months grace. That's the first point from a working capital point of view. There is also another component for incremental investment where a business comes and says, during this period, I feel that we have a sweet spot where my business is in demand and I want to ramp it up, so I need to buy a bit of equipment or whatever it is. There's a separate a part of that package which is also available. And I think the way banks will look at it is, at the moment, there has been no guidelines in terms of how to carve the pie. It would be, I believe, on a first in, first out basis for the grant, for the refinance component, where banks would have to first assess themselves that each of these requests is bona fide, and they have to then obviously make their own application to the central bank, which is facilitating that. So that is the first point regarding the 50 billion. But Shamil, parking that aside, that is only for working capital. Beyond that, there is a much larger pool of borrowers in banking who may or may not be in need of incremental working capital, but they may have a fundamental problem in managing their existing requirements with existing cash flows. There is a separate arrangement where the banks on appeal would consider differing interest for a certain period and also capital for a certain period. So you allow that amount of money, which normally would go out of the business, to remain within the business and give a bit of oxygen for the business to manage. So those are two separate things. One is a refinance element, but the bigger opportunity, I think, for the banks is to work with the SME sector in looking at the need to restructure and give more breathing space with what they call the moratorium. That is the moratorium package. And frankly, while that is carved in a document, if I speak on behalf of all my other fellow banking colleagues, I think no self-respecting banker will refuse a genuine request which comes from a genuine SME borrower and saying, hey, I am your customer. I have dealt with you for this period. This is my business. For this reason, I am today stuck. Right? Can we agree to discuss and see how we could work together to make sure that you don't get into a difficulty as a banker, and we give us the breathing space to come out of this and repay our obligations. So I think that listening capability will be practiced, I'm sure, by the entire industry.
Mr. Agaraja, very quickly, now last year we had a similar situation, but not a pandemic of this sort, but the 21st April attacks, the Easter Sunday attacks that happened in Sri Lanka. One of the worst affected industries at that time was tourism industry. One of the worst affected industries this time around is also the tourism industry, because barriers have been closed from all nations right now. Hence, there are no tourist arrivals at all to the country. There was also a loan scheme which was introduced by the government then on the 21st April attacks subsequently to this attack that happened. However, most of the hotel sector individuals or companies were not able to obtain this loan because they had to leave collateral with the banks in question. So this process didn't work properly. So do you think there is a meaning, it's meaningless for the government to have a process of this sort, even in the long run, as far as this 50 billion rupees grant is concerned? Because you may have the grant, but you may not get the money.
Shamil, again, to correct you with all due respect, it is not a grant. It is a refinance. It is a refinance package. And it's very, very important that the general public distinguish the difference between a free cash grant and what is a refinance package, where the ultimate risk and the responsibility still rests with the balance sheets of the lending bank. There is no shift in that.
So this is all just a myth that we're talking about.
No, I don't think it's really a myth. If you take away the 50 billion, as I said, it's a limited quantum when you look at the bigger problem. But I think beyond the 50 billion, what we have to realize is the banks themselves, as I said, collectively shoulder almost 10 trillion of loans. And I'm sure the lending officers in these banks will be responsible in how they behave towards their customers. And the primary responsibility is to interact with these customers, the borrowers, and see how best they could give them some more breathing space to come out of a problem. That, so I think, is far more important than the 50 billion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyagaraja. I want to move attention to Desh ultimately. Deshal, we have a question to you from Arita Wickramasinghe. The question is, can a central bank manage the exchange rate and inflation at the same time? Because Sri Lanka has a soft peg with the US dollar, but evidence shows that the soft peg economics and the impossible trinity of central banking doesn't work. What should the central bank focus on, currency stability or inflation at a time like this?
Yeah, good question, Arita. So the impossible trinity is that any central bank cannot simultaneously manage the interest rate, the exchange rate, whilst maintaining capital, free capital flows. So what we are seeing is a kind of gray area in between all of this. So the central bank has been trying to manage interest rates. There has been some interventions to maintain interest rates at a lower level by having funds that are controlled by the government to invest directly in the government securities market. And at the same time, there has also been some intervention in the currency market as well. In March, I think there was net dollar sales of about $174 million in the month of March. But at the same time, the government has also started introducing some restrictions, both on the current account in terms of import restrictions, but also in terms of some restrictions on the capital account as well. So what you're seeing is it's not a kind of pure play attempt here. There are interventions across all of these aspects. And in a situation like this, where you have this kind of volatility, that some intervention is necessary. But it's also important that that intervention is managed in an appropriate way, and it is phased out once you see the immediate volatility moving away. Whether the central bank should prioritize interest rates or exchange rate or inflation at this time. So I think in this current situation where we have a large negative shock in terms of aggregate demand, inflationary pressures will be quite limited anyway. So that shouldn't be a major concern in terms of the general expectations on inflation that central bank typically targets a rate between 4% and 6%. I don't think in the short term that is really under threat, given the significant downturn we have in terms of aggregate demand. So the bigger concern now would be in terms of the currency. There again, the general practice of intervention to address undue or excess volatility can be accommodated, but it is, I think, imprudent to go against the secular flow of the currency. If there's a secular trend of depreciation, it is difficult to continue to intervene against that in a sustainable manner, particularly when you have reserves at a relatively low and weak level. So in general, it is a very difficult ask to try to balance all of these three measures. It can be done in the short term, but it's not something that is sustainable beyond short term.
Dr. Anrekanaika, now I want to move my attention to you now. Now, in the long term, a strong export base and sustainable FDIs will be quite critical for us to manage the country's economy. However, when you look at the figures of the readjusted data, as far as economic growth is concerned, China has readjusted its growth rate from 6% to 2.30%. Sri Lanka has readjusted from 4.50 to 2.20, while the US has readjusted from 4% to 0.40. And Europe as a whole has readjusted its economy from 1.30 to -1%. How do you think Sri Lanka is going to attract foreign direct investments at a time like a global pandemic of this sort? Because there are no boundaries. We are talking about the world as one country now. So who are they going to ask for FDIs? Who are they going to go with the begging bowl and say, give us some money because we want to strengthen our economy while the world is at a crisis? Dr. Ekanaika?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Dr. Ekanaika.
Right. It's a very tough question. First thing we have to bear in mind is that investors are not looking at the immediate term, very short term. Any serious investor will be looking at the medium term and the longer term for any substantial investment. So even though the world economy is a major part of it is actually on a lockdown of one sort or the other, serious investors will be looking at the unfolding scenario, and they will be looking at, okay, where will be, what are the places, regimes where there will be opportunity for meaningful investments, meaning investments which will generate a good return in the medium to long term. So clearly, they'll be looking at a post-COVID scenario, perhaps not a situation where the everything has come back to normal, but is in the process of getting back to normal. And then they will be looking at a whole range of things which are to do with how friendly the regime is for foreign investment. Is the legal environment protecting such investments? Secondly, is the regulatory environment encouraging investment by speeding up processes? Can you go to one place? You need 2 or 3 other places and get all the approvals to start working on your investment. Clearly, a situation where an investor has to wait for months and months to be able to start his work will not encourage investors to come in to Sri Lanka. So one idea is that can the BOI, which is expected to be the one-stop shop, have zones which are pre-cleared for environmental purposes for selected activities, so that a newcomer doesn't have to get environmental clearance. The zone has been cleared. Can BOI take over functions such as approval of building permits, getting electricity connection, etc., etc.? Then, if, as I said earlier, if the legal framework is such that it guarantees the rights of the investor, and also if there is a reasonable degree of assurance that the overall policy framework of the country will not be subject to sudden changes. Then
Dr. Ekanaka,
there
if I
will
can
be
interrupt you,
investments.
if I can interrupt you for a second here, how
Yes.
important is it for the Export Development Board as well as the BOI to act proactively in a situation of this sort? I can give you a classic example. Just 3 weeks after COVID-19, when Sri Lanka locked its doors for foreign travelers, you had the EDB waking up and sending a release to everyone in the industry stating that it is important for the exports to start operating. Again, a very reactive approach, not a proactive one. So how important is it for organizations like the BOI, like the Export Development Board, to be proactive in a situation of this sort? It's very important, isn't it?
So it's, Shama, the most important thing is to read the current signals, the current developments in the global marketplace when it comes to FDI. One likely development is over-reliance on single source markets will have to be reduced. People will be very concerned about getting all their stuff from one market or the other. So Sri Lanka has an opportunity to select a few of those areas and then invite investors. Okay, come in here. We are on a main shipping lane from east to west and west to east as well. We have good infrastructure. We are giving special assistance, facilitation to some of those industries which are likely to ship from the current sources, maybe China, maybe India, maybe any other place. So, and then work proactively will be the name of the game,
Right.
not just across the board. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes, it does, Dr. Kanaka. I want to move my attention now to Mr. Shakta Murtunga, a finance professional. So I have a question for you from one of my colleagues at work, Kandeepan Balendran, who is also the host of the Minnal program aired on Shakti TV. So his question is, there are almost 1.9 million people dependent on daily wage, plus another 2 million self-employed. Now, as of today, there is no supportive systems announced by government or even banks. There are millions of people without even a single bank account and absolutely no savings. How are we going to handle this pressure and create a supportive system for those who are in need? So leadership is critical, building confidence of the organization is critical, as well as cash is critical also for survival of these companies and the government. So how important is this, Shakta, to having a supportive system for these daily wage earners?
So I assume your question is these guys are self-employed, or are they? Is your question about these guys being employed also in companies?
No, they're self-employed, most of them. So 2 million people are self-employed and 1.9 million people are dependent on a daily wage. So we're talking about these individuals in question.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question, and in fact, I have the same challenge with some of the guys whom I know, including some plumbers that I use in Sri Lanka, and even the guy who does the hairdressing for me. The guy has been out of a job now for the last 3 weeks, and coming back into work. They, I'm sure, are going to have challenges looking for income. One of the things that I think some of these people will have, I'm sure some of some of these people who do work will have lesser income, and some of these people will have no income. I think the people who will have lesser income will have to start managing, and again, how to manage funds, how to change your lifestyle, how you got to do different things in order to get an extra income. These type of things, we need to help people, and there should be a structure of doing that. I still don't have any ideas to give you, but I think there could be various thoughts that a government system, the private sector also can help in terms of an extra income by changing their skills. So because their first level of skill, for example, if he's a plumber or a hairdresser, he may not have the necessary income. So first thing I would advise all those people is we need to try and bring down our standards and try and manage our funds. But equally, as Tia mentioned before, do some extra work, and probably we also need to think of reskilling some of these people in different sectors, right? So that is a challenge, and that is something that this is change. In my book, this is change. We've learned in the corporate sector about change, but none of these people have gone through that type of change in their personal life, nor have they gone through in their workplace. So they have to be helped. We need to put a structure in place to reskill some of these people. We need to talk to some of these people and help them out, because it's not only the income. I'm sure there will be a lot of people suffering from mental disorder because of these situations. Their families will be waiting for food. They are unable to get food on the table. There'll be a lot of stress for these people. So I think we need to think through helping this sector, which is a very important sector in Sri Lanka, because otherwise we will have huge amounts of socio-economic issues. Right? If these people are not looked at, ideas that I can give is basically reskilling, but that again we need to work with the government and get a structure in, at least whether it's by district or by region or whatever that the government feels that we need to do reskilling. Even also help set up some psychological training, psychological help, helping these people to think how they're going to change. These type of things, you get these type of help for people in the West, but I don't think Sri Lanka has gone through that type of change in the past. This is something new. These are new things that we need to think through. But I think these are probably the two ideas that I have now that I can give even as an idea to help some of these people, because they are dependent, and quite a lot of people will struggle as we start coming out to work moment the curfew is over.
So, Dharanath, I want to again speak about the foreign direct investment aspect with you. Now, a recent research paper by the Overseas Development Institute, or the ODI, says Sri Lanka was identified as one of the most vulnerable middle-income countries due to the impact of COVID-19 and as a resulting Chinese economic slowdown. How do you think we are going to cope in the next few months if we are not going to get the much needed foreign direct investment from countries like China?
Shamir, that's why I told you this is we have to hit couple of boundaries. And there are two things that we could do. One is to bring back the investor confidence. I think as Deshal mentioned, if we could quickly go for an IMF package, so then there will be some confidence being restored on our economy.
But the IMF, but Dharanath, IMF has already said that Sri Lanka is not in the new tranche where the poor countries are concerned. So we are not going to get that money easily from the IMF without restrictions. And it is important to get the money without having any boundaries or even any ties attached. It's no strings attached. It's very important.
Shamir, definitely there will be some conditions. Even when we went for the last time IMF package in 2016, there were multiple conditions like improving the government revenue. So one thing is we have to restore the confidence, and if we are going for an IMF package again, if we are going for renegotiations, of course it will come with conditions. Number two is, as Dr. Ekanaka said, now to bring the investments, since the investors are looking at medium and long run, there has to be big reforms done within the system. That's why I said those are the big boundaries that we have to score, because that way we can bring the confidence to the investors. Anyway, our FDI rates were very low. It was I think when the previous government came into power, it was about $750 million, and I think then it improved, if I'm not mistaken, if my numbers are right, about 1 billion, 1.5 billion. So that will be a big loss, definitely. So that's number one. Number two is, I think the other side of the coin is now, since people are looking towards joining the entrepreneurial world, if I'm, as I explained to you before, if I'm considering an online shop, if I'm trying to earn extra bucks by doing something part-time, the government could do is to clear the barriers. For instance, there could be payment barriers online. For instance, we still don't have the PayPal. There are some restrictions. What are the alternative payment methods that we could bring in? So that's one area that we could work on. At the same time, for instance, like the recent examples, now there was a big issue on vegetable transportation. Of course, your channel has been reported that at the Damul Economic Center, the farmers had brought the vegetables into the center, but it has gone wasted. But if you look at the government direction, they said the permits, the curfew permits, can only be taken by the previous vegetable transporters. Now, if I'm an entrepreneurial person, if I have a truck in my home which I could not employ for the previous, the sand transportation or anything, So what if I'm an entrepreneur, what I would do is I already know there's a market shortage in transporting vegetables. So I will quickly go to the police station and get a curfew pass and join the vegetable transportation system. So now that opportunity has been stopped. But of course, I understand why the government brought that, because now all the lorry owners will go and take the curfew permits, and they may violate the social distancing rules. But the market operates in a opportunistic way. So I think the government should open those opportunities, so then the people can move around it. For an instance, in US, the General Motors have been provided the opportunity to develop ventilators. So General Motors is completely on something else, and ventilators is not in their scope. So I think for the small entrepreneurs like little Sri Lankans, I think those opportunities has to be open. So then the pressure will not come to people like Mr. Tyagaraja on their balance sheet, because otherwise they will not be able to pay their leasing payment, and they will default on their daily finances and the loans that they have taken. So in terms of FDI, to recap, I think we have to hit a couple of big sixes, and there are things that we could do easily, as Dr. Ekanayaka said, the BOI reforms and maybe considering the IMF option, or maybe, as I mentioned earlier, this is where we have to utilize our foreign relationships. Maybe speak to China, India very unlikely, but go for a bilateral loan and consider that option, and give that market the sentiment that people are supporting us and we are returning back. So then the investor confidence will be can be brought back.
So because you mentioned Mr. Tyagaraja's name, I want to tap Mr. Tyagaraja now. You have a question, Mr. Tyagaraja, from Aditya Wickramasinghe. Sri Lanka is trying to attract foreign exchange by completely removing restrictions on money inflows. Now, banks are being asked to open new foreign currency accounts with no checks on sources of origin. What risks does this pose to anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism finance and sanctions obligations? Now, does this mean, Arthur says, that banks will now accept deposits, say from North Korea, in violation of UN sanction laws, or from ISIS for that matter, in violation of anti-terrorism finance rules? Mr. Tyagaraja?
There was some public announcements about this invitation, but subsequently there was a circular which came from the regulator, the central bank, to all banks, the regulator who governs us. In that, they have given some guidance as to the type of eligible people who are allowed to open these accounts and send monies. But beyond that, you got to understand that every one of us, Sri Lanka is a signatory to the FATF 40 guidelines, the Financial Action Task Force 40 guidelines. It was one of the very first during the times of the conflict. We were signatories. Secondly, as you and I both know, Sri Lanka got unfortunately into the grey list last year, and we all had to work tirelessly to get the country out of the grey list, and we came out of the grey list towards the latter part of last year. So saying that, while it is an invitation for people to look at this country and invest, all I would say is, as banks, I don't think any of us will dilute on our fundamental obligations to look at our know your customer, ask the right questions, and making sure that monies which are suspicious of either money laundering or terrorism financing certainly don't come through our books.
So I want to pose a question to Shakta Amaratunga, finance professional. Shakta, what practical steps should the private sector take to ensure business continuity, and what steps can the government take to support the private sector in these efforts? Because today companies are facing closure, employees are facing layoffs, and this is a major issue.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a very good question. In terms of private sector, I wouldn't. I would say that the big corporates have quite a lot of capable and very intelligent support function. So they will all have quite a lot of thought process already. But in terms of the private sector, small, medium companies, I think in this situation, anybody running an organization, leadership and giving confidence to your staff, giving people that extra motivation, energizing them, I think that is critical in this environment if people are to succeed, because you need to have your people. They are the people who are going to give you thoughts, and bringing that in, you need to talk to your people and try and understand whether you have a business as you move forward, because you must have been producing something for which there would not be a market, or there would be only a few things that you can produce. So you need to start thinking differently and see whether you need to do something totally different in your organization. So basically look at innovative thinking out of the box. You need to start thinking how you're going to survive. And survival in this environment, cash is critical. Cash is we've learned that cash is king, and now actually cash is even a bigger king, because cash. So everybody has to start looking at cash. It has not, we shouldn't look at profits in an organization. We should look at cash generation, cash profits, and squeeze out everything that you have in an organization today, because you need to make sure that you have the money to invest, because you can go to the banks have a limited pot, right? So you need to first see how much money that can you extract from your business. You have to go through each business as its own way of looking at things. There's no one size fits all, but I think companies need to start thinking out of the box, stop all the nice things, and there should not be any egos. I think if you have egos, and if you want to run the organization the way you ran in the past, I think your survival is going to be a very, very short period. So you need to start thinking totally differently and make a step change. So provide leadership, motivate your staff, look at cash, be innovative, look at things differently, and look at all costs across the organization. And there is technology, and many companies do not use technology, and there is enough people who currently are they are in Sri Lanka, very intelligent people whom you can use in order to get you that market information, market intelligence, artificial intelligence, all that you can use and try and look at. And you might start a business totally different tomorrow, because you may not have a business today. So that mindset should be among people, and people should definitely do scenario planning, because you need to look at cash flows for the next 6 to 12 months. In a worst case scenario, can I survive? What do I need to stop? And that's why many companies currently are looking at even looking at wages and salaries of staff. And that again, if I come back to the previous question that you asked the panelists and me, the government, we need to see whether the current labor laws allow some of these things. We got to be flexible. We got to be different. We got to help each other. And that's why I'm saying, in order to address these, your first question, I said government need to set up a task force to help the economy and the businesses. I think it has to have different pillars that helps and go. Basically, industries can go and highlight their issues. They have to go and highlight all the issues that they have. Some industries have problems with price control, whether that is relevant for today. Do we need to go and change it because the exchange rate is now gone from 175 to 200? How do we manage? Because are they going to sell at those prices and make losses? How can they survive the next 6 months? Right. So these type of things.
So I have a related question to Dharanath. Dharanath, you were not in favor of the government printing money initially when COVID-19 struck as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. So how much money should be prudently printed to meet the cash shortfall that we are bound to face? Because we know that inflation and exchange rates are the most less relevant issues as far as this pandemic is concerned in the short term.
Shamir, first of all, the reason why the money printing was not an option, because it's also connected to the currency fall. I think Dishal explained that On the other hand, we should also need to understand the central bank, with all due respect to the measures that they have taken. They are also in a very bad wicket. For instance, we have to sell about 12 tons of our gold reserves a couple of weeks ago, and you do it when you don't go to the pawning shop when your household economy is running well. You go as the last resort. So that is quite critical. So that's why I mentioned the printing money will also have a long run and a short run and medium term impacts. That's why I said it's important that we raise the money within the market rather than going for a printing option, because it will have an impact on the exchange rate, and long run it will causes inflation, which will be a double whammy for the poor people, because it is ultimately getting to the poor people's wallet. Because when the exchange, as you very correctly said, when the exchange rate is high, our pharmaceuticals, that is medicine and the basic essentials, will go expensive. So that's why I said I really don't have a number how much do we have to pump. I haven't done that calculation, but it's important. I stick to the same message that I did in the earlier show. There are some don'ts that we should not do at this moment, or there are certain shot selection that we should not take. This is, of course, we have to hit boundaries, as I said, but maybe it's not the time to do like a reverse sweep for a bowler like Lasith Malinga, because you are then throwing your wicket. That's why I said price controls is bad, and luckily government took off the price controls on tin fish and dal. I think only your show spoke about this issue, and now the bad thing is they are trying to impose it on perishable goods, which could be very bad, because at least salmon and the tin fish and dal can be stored for some time. But now when you have a price control on a perishable good, farmers leave without option, rather than either dumping it or selling it even lower than the cost. So that will have a very bad impact. So that's my
thoughts. I have a question for, so as we speak right now, as Dhananath speaks on the show, we are getting messages from Facebook Live as well as Zoom right now. And I have a question for Dr. Anure Ekanaika. Dr. Ekanaika, I know that you have also consulted many companies as well as state sector companies in Sri Lanka with regard to the way forward. Now, there is a question from the new graduates asking for advice on what they can do to even get a job at a critical time like this, because we're talking about layoffs, we're talking about salary cuts. What's the fate of the new graduates of the country? How can companies make a business continuity plan in an environment like this? And what simple steps could the government take to support graduates?
Shamil, this has been a perennial question. In the first place, that graduates wanting to have jobs is not something we can just wish away. That's a reality. Here are human beings who have acquired some qualifications and they would like to get on with life, so they need jobs. The challenge is, what are the kind of jobs they can do, or can they be trained to be able to participate in a productive manner in the economy? I strongly believe that it is possible. Of course, for that, nowadays, the toolkit of educators, trainers is much more improved than what it used to be. And recently, even from this webinar, we can see that it's no longer necessary to have buildings for people to meet together in one single place to have a discussion, conversation, even a learning session. So by leveraging on available technology to the fullest, and by learning from entities like the Open University of Sri Lanka, which currently has some 40,000 students, and some of the other entities of higher learning, it's possible to train the graduates who are looking for employment, if they don't have the right skills, to give them the skills. And then they can be made use of. We are in a world where the skills of every single human being is necessary.
Right. Deshal Dimel, economist of Greater Research, I want to move my attention to you, Deshal. Balance of payments. Right now, what is your stand or what is your thoughts on the balance of payments situation in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so at present, you can see the different pressures that are applying on it from the current account, as I mentioned earlier. Largely, it looks like for this year, it will largely be in balance because of significant reductions in imports, and whilst you have reductions in inflows as well. Capital account is really where the pressure is going to come in. It's going to come in largely from the fact that we have about $6 billion worth of liabilities that are maturing this year, which we will need to be able to we have to pay back. And we only have about $7.4 billion worth of reserves. So the space on the reserve side is quite limited. So from an overall BOP perspective, you can see that it's really getting constrained as a result of the capital account outflows that we are seeing this year. It is why it's important that we seek some kind of line of financing. The IMF still is an option. So even though we are not eligible for the type of line of credit that is available to the lowest income countries, we still have an option of going to standby arrangement. We did a similar one in 2009. We also have an option for a rapid financing instrument. That's a relatively new option that the IMF has. So we do have options on the table, but we will have to be willing to bite the bullet and come to some compromises in terms of our economic management when we go for some kind of arrangement like that. But in terms of restoring confidence in the balance of payments in reserves, I think it's critical that we do go for some kind of external financing arrangement.
And now, since the start of the year, the Sri Lankan rupee has depreciated against the US dollar by approximately around 9% as of 6th April 2020. And the government took some measures. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka introduced several measures such as restrictions on sovereign bond purchases by licensed banks, import restrictions and restrictions on outward investments to ease the pressure on the Sri Lankan rupee. Will all this work in the long run?
So I do not see most of these measures as being sustainable in the long run. So if you take the import restrictions, for instance, between around 47% of Sri Lanka's government revenue is collected at the border. So that's 2018 data. 2019, it has come down to about 42. But it's actually likely to increase even more given the fact that the tax reduction measures have further reduced our domestic revenue generation capacity. So from a government revenue perspective, imports are critical. So I can't see a situation where we continue to restrict imports going forward because it's going to have a significant fiscal impact as well. With regard to the capital account restrictions, again, if you want to attract capital, if you want to be able to attract investments, if you want to be able to attract investments into both FDI and into portfolio investment, we need to be able to show that, look, you're able to convert your money and take it out as well. So when we make capital restrictions like this, even temporarily, it does give the wrong signal. So again, short term, given the pressure that we have on reserves, it is understandable that countries would take this kind of measure, but it is not something that should be done beyond the immediate volatility.
Right, Mr. Tyagaraja, I know you're working for the private sector, but you're the best person that I could ask this question from with regard to government revenue. Now, last year, we know because of a presidential election, the government abolished the payee tax scheme. And now a new tax scheme has been introduced under a different name in place of the payee tax. How important is the government to make the right choices at the right time? Because many economists believed, even back then in November, this was a bad move.
If I take that question slightly differently as to what could the government today do, the fiscal deficit is definitely one area it has to be addressed. But leaving that aside, that's not going to happen tomorrow. If I can maybe pick three useful comments I would like to recommend for three separate segments of our society, starting from the vulnerable sector and the low income sector. One of the problems we seem to have continuously is the timely and the efficient delivery of their cash, whether it's samudya or not, into the hands. We seem to see that almost every day on television, the ranting. And I think this is the time for the country, the government to come across and accelerate the rollout of the biometric identification and the equivalent of your Aadhaar card. This is the time you start to push those essential payments direct to the beneficiaries' hands, like the Indian Aadhaar payments. And I hope the government will take that very seriously. Point one, that is for the lower income segment. Then if you look at the employable, I think there was one recommendation by one advisor, senior advisor to government, about taking money from the employer's provident fund. So I'm not going to get into that particular merits of that or demerits of that. But I think another way of looking at that is to look at the current monthly contributions of employees to the EPF, not employers, and look at the possibility of, say, reducing. I think on average, if you say the employer's contribution is, say, today 8% of gross, bring it down to, say, 2% for the next 12 months and see what does that do to release cash direct into the hands of middle class wage earning families. Now, Malaysia did that in the last couple of months, and they brought down the employees' monthly contribution from 11% down to 4%. And the estimated cash inflow to the middle class working households is estimated at just over 2.3 billion US. So I think that is something the government should definitely consider. And then if you look at the bigger boys, this question was asked, is 50 billion enough? In my humble opinion, this is my personal opinion, I don't think 50 billion is enough. But there again, I don't think the answer is to also print money. I think what, as Shakta said, a lot of these bigger companies now need, with good business models, they're going to get into cash flow issues in the short to medium term. So what we now need is also, in addition to money, advisory and restructuring some of those balance sheets. And I'm not talking about the typical trade financing businesses. I'm talking about businesses which have a fundamental story and a model which could contribute to the growth of the real economy. For that, I think the answer is to restart that conversation which started in 2014, which was to set up that development bank in the country. And if I can just briefly touch on this, in 2014, there was a move to combine the two existing DFIs, which should have today contributed to a trillion rupee balance sheet with some of the best in talent in terms of project financing, investment banking, experience in restructuring. And I think this is the time that was almost about to be executed when in 2015, the new government which came in saw it fit to drop it. But I think this is the time for Professor Lakshman and Dr. Jayasundara to revisit that story and see whether we could create a development bank, either starting from scratch, fund it without public deposits, and look at it from bilateral. But I don't think that is a solution because there isn't enough fresh talent. So I guess the next story, which is the most viable, to revisit those two development banks and look at which are now really doing commercial banking, and to see, is there an opportunity to merge and create a trillion rupee balance sheet And I think that is the way forward, to also look at even converting some of the existing debts of some of these companies into equity. That will need some reforms in banking, but this is the time for government to take very clear steps to align and support the bigger businesses as well, but not just traders, real economic.
Mr. Agaraja, I need to interrupt you for a second here. I need to close the Q&A session at the moment and go for the final round. I'm giving each speaker 2 minutes, and I will pose a question to you to get some clarity on some of the subjects that you all have spoken about already. So the final round, 2 minutes each. Let's start off with Deshal Dimel, economist, Verited Research. Deshal, I know you don't have a crystal ball in front of you to decide where the rupee is going to depreciate and where it's going to stand by the end of the year. But give us a forecast for the importers as well as the exporters. By the end of May, where will the rupee stand, and why will it stand there?
No, I mean, that's not something that, because if it was based on fundamentals, then you could make some kind of call. But as I said early on, that right now, what is really driving the rupee is sentiment. And sentiment is not something that anybody can really decide on and do some kind of quantitative calculation on. But what I could see is that, look, if the government does demonstrate some measures to restore credibility and confidence, as I was saying, either through a clear line from one of the IFIs, then you could see a recovery of the rupee from where it is right now. But until that time, I think that depreciation pressure is just going to continue. But it's very difficult to make a call and say, exactly where it's going to land, because it's, as I said, purely based on sentiment. Could I just come in on one small point? Earlier, we discussed about daily wage earners. I think that gives an important message to us in terms of whether we need to really think more about the sustainability of this lockdown. In countries which have advanced economies, where you have smaller informal economies, where the government has the space to be able to provide cash transfers to people whose incomes are vulnerable, there you can have sustained lockdowns. In developing countries like ours, having a sustained curfew or lockdown, I don't see it being sustainable beyond a couple more weeks. So we need to look at alternatives, look at options of maybe where we shelter those who are most vulnerable, and then gradually start opening up the economy in the rest of the country, maybe through from district basis or in other ways in which we slowly start opening it up. Because until we give the chance for people to start earning a livelihood again, we will have a serious problem with regard to people whose incomes are very vulnerable, particularly the daily wage earners and the informal sector. So I think that is something that we need to really look at.
Very quickly, Deshal, before I wrap up with you we spoke about FDIs a couple of times, and the recent rupee against the depreciation against the US dollar and the impending challenges as far as return on investment is concerned on FDIs. Can we expect a glimmer of hope, a silver lining for the FDIs?
I mean, look, when you have weakening currency, it makes investors nervous in general. Whether it is FDI or whether it's portfolio investment, if the local currency weakens significantly, then it certainly affects your earnings. But I mean, from right now, given the volatility that we're seeing in global markets, in local economy as well, I don't think we can really expect FDIs in a big way in the short term. Our real focus should be now to make sure that we keep people's livelihoods going, we keep the economy alive, so that once you have restoration of something with normalcy, we will have an economy that can then recover and start getting back to work.
Thank you very much.
Should be the absolute priority.
Thank you very much, Deshal Dimel, economist from Verited Research. I now move my attention in the final round to Dhananath Fernando, Chief Operating Officer of the Advocata Institute. Dhananath, you spoke about how important it is to have a well-seasoned cricket team playing the field right now. But do you think that the government is having the right people at the right places? Because even the task force on economic recovery does not have industry specialists. So do you think the government is doing the right thing as far as fighting COVID-19 and the country's economy is concerned? You have 2 minutes to wrap up, Dhananath.
Shamir, it's a mixed. Government has taken some decisions which are right, like requesting the IMF and removing price controls and asking for restructuring the debt. Of course, it has also pros and cons. In the meantime, I think, as you very correctly said, it's important to have industry specialists in this task force because they were the one who really understand the dynamics, especially at least three representing the main export sectors, apparel, tea, rubber, coconut, and the main exports. So I think that is something that government has to proactively explore and have the right people in place, especially on managing this task. My final piece of advice is basically we entered the crisis with a bad start. So it is important that we get some of the big reforms done because government can sacrifice some of the political capital they have because people are ready. People are ready to take a pay cut. People are ready to fasten their seatbelt, and most probably government has to roll back the tax cut that they have given. Of course, they have introduced new tax lines. It will be tough on people, but unfortunately, I don't see another escape route rather than taking or biting that bullet. And at the same time, while we are getting those big reforms, we can't lose wickets. That is basically not having too many controls on the suppliers and not to interrupt the supply chains, and having that regulatory framework. As Dr. Ekanayaka said, government should not come and play Sangakkara's role. Let the players play, but the government just set the rules of the game, and I'm sure Sri Lankans are more than capable to play the game. So government just do a facilitation role and let the players play the game, and I'm sure if the government is serious about it, if we were given the opportunity, I'm sure we can do that, but it will be hard, and we have to go for big reforms and big couple of sixes. It will be hard, but I'm sure as Sri Lankans we can do that. But one final point is, don't bring politics, and I see also some tensions on religious, ethnic issues, and we are sometimes. I was very worried that are we going back to the unfortunate past. I think we have to avoid that as well, because we really can't afford another crisis while we are battling like a global pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dhananath Fernando, CEO of the Advocata Institute. I just hope and pray that you're not referring to the Sri Lanka cricket team that was performing the last few years. If that is what the government is going to perform like in the next few months, we will all be in deep problems. We now move our attention to Dr. Andre Kanayaka, economist as well as former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Ekanayaka, interestingly, what new industries do you see opportunities in for Sri Lanka? Are there any niche markets that you feel Sri Lanka would have a significant competitive advantage in? What are the emerging opportunities Sri Lanka has as a nation, and how important is it for government to prioritize its commitments? Your time starts now.
Shamir, I'm repeating myself here. I think the diversification of source markets for products, supply chains is probably the biggest opportunity Sri Lanka has at this point of time. Now, exactly what are those products and services as well, which Sri Lanka can competitively supply to the global market, has to be evaluated by competent people very quickly, and the right signals have to be given. The other big possibility I can see is in the area of IT-enabled services. Mr. Tyagaraja mentioned a little while ago how rapidly banking services, obtaining banking services via the internet has expanded. We've seen how rapidly people who did not want to take that route have taken it because they are forced to that situation. We also saw in the past couple of weeks how small businesses joined with last mile deliverers like PickMe and Uber to supply essential food items to households. So we have the general populace have the capability to quickly come on board. And you asked me the question a little while ago about the graduates. I strongly believe that this is the time when those graduates, at least those who are willing to learn new skills, can be trained in that area, and we can become a significant player in the global markets for those who.
Dr. Ekanaka,
Yes.
Dr. Ekanaka, very quickly, I'll give you an extra minute to answer this. How important is it? Tell me some ideas with regard to the best advice you can give on business continuity plans for businesses and your views in likely new trends in the market for business.
See, quite a lot of the elements were touched upon by Shakta a little while ago. So in summary, for me, it is staying fit right now and then actively looking for what other things can we do based on the skill set we have right now.
Right.
In fact, a number of business leaders and young entrepreneurs have told me the last 2 to 3 weeks of curfew had been a godsend for them because they have had time to step away from the daily drudgery of firefighting in their businesses to sit back and think, what can we do?
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ekanaka. I now move attention to Shakta Amartunga, finance professional. Mr. Amartunga, it will be the survival of the fittest and the most agile in a situation of this sort, COVID-19. Not all will survive, and there would be a cascading effect of this catastrophe on many businesses. How do you think businesses should groom itself to face the world in the next few months in particularly?
Shamir, as I said before, I think the businesses should basically ensure that they have enough cash to run, and cash is my mantra to all businesses. So you need to make sure that you have sufficient cash to survive. Then you should try and be very innovative. You have to be innovative. Look at new products, what the consumers need. You might have to look at new ways of delivering stuff. You got to look at all that in order to survive, right? And you need your people, you need your employees, right? Some of them may lose their jobs, some of them may work half day with you, some of them may not work with you, but you need most of them. You need their energy, you need them to help you, right? So businesses will definitely have got to think through, look at cash, look at their people, and basically be innovative if they are to survive in the next couple of months, and basically challenge the status quo and try and even help the government to start thinking and help the businesses to overcome some of the challenges that they have, and therefore I'm going back to this task force. The task force that the government has set up has got to have that ability to see these people and help remove some of the obstacles that they will have in the next couple of months if they are to survive. If they do not do that, they will find it extremely difficult to survive. And if you're highly leveraged, you need to look at all the cost and make sure that you have either a standing banking facility or cut down on all your expenses and be able to only do your day-to-day operations. So those businesses are vulnerable, but other businesses also have got to start looking at every critical line in their expenses and their cash flow.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Shakta Amartunga, finance professional, for joining us this evening. Finally, we have Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja, senior banker, managing director, CEO of Cargill's Bank. Mr. Tyagaraja, you did give some messages to the government, but at the same time, the government is bound to face some challenges as well. What do you think the government would face in the next few months when implementing the messages that you did say before?
I think certainly in the midst of all this, I think the fact that we are going to have a reduction in exports, inward remittances, tourism on one side, and a challenge to defend curtailing imports is going to be a challenge. But that's something they have to do, the curtailing of imports or non-essentials. I think last year, as an indication, the extent of vehicle imports, I believe, is something to the extent of about $800 million. So this is, again, something which was not going into the real economy. And this is one thing I think, while some may criticize the government, as a short-term measure, I personally, I think, give credence to the government for having taken that difficult decision. Right? That's one point. The second issue is, I think, while they do all this, there are a couple of things we got to be mindful of. There is still a whole heap of Sri Lankans living and working abroad on short-term contracts. I'm not looking at the permanent migrants. And those people, especially in the Middle East, we need to look at any of the journeys and see whether there is any vulnerability in those families. That's one thing we've got to look at. And definitely, as I think it was either Anura or one of the others who said, it was about the daily wage earners and that informal segment. While this whole banking package talks about SME, there is also a huge ecosystem out there who does not have a banking relationship, who are with the Ginipolikarias and on informal borrowing. Now, those are probably the most vulnerable parts of society. So government has to balance and look at those guys more than anybody else.
So thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on the show. Mr. Rajan Tyagaraja, Senior Banker, Managing Director, CEO of Cargill's Bank, for joining us this evening. Dr. Andre Kanayaka, Economist, former Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Shakta Matunga, who is a finance professional. Dharanath Fernando, Chief Operating Officer of the Alcata Institute, as well as Deshal Jamel, Economist of Verity Research. Thank you very much to all of you for joining this evening. A big thank you goes out to Mr. Chandra Jayaratna as well, who's acting as a rapporteur for these episodes, the new normal. And he's the former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, as well as Nero Cook, Group Director of the Capital Maharaj Organization, for organizing this, and also the Newsfirst team for doing a fantastic job by getting us all online on the Zoom application, making sure that we heed to the health authorities' call to ensure that social distancing is maintained. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on this special episode to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the country's economy. If I would say already collapsed economy, it would be right. So we have to be optimistic. We are a resilient nation. I want to leave you, all of you, today with a quote, as I always do on my shows. The flower that blooms in adversity is the rarest and the most beautiful of all. Take care and have a great evening.